Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery and I was looking at my Vermibag tote here, the one that's got my African nightcrawlers in it, and there was just something wrong about this date, the date on when the worms were launched originally. Because I took this all the way back to the very beginning when I received worm cocoons for these African nightcrawlers, and I actually shot a video of these worms when they were originally launched into a time-lapse bin, and it was not on May 26th, it was on May 24th. So I calibrated the information in my tracking spreadsheet to correct the mistake. I stuck with the May 26th date for the European nightcrawlers because it was a couple days after these guys got launched and their cocoons got launched that I started my European nightcrawlers. Although if you're talking about cocoons and they were all mailed to me on the same day and everything else, I don't know if it really matters. You know, these little guys could have actually sat in the time lapse tub for days and days before they hatched. So either way, it's very difficult to say exactly how old these worms are. Best thing to use is an approximate date, and I would say that the real approximate date now is 365 days since these worm cocoons were placed into an environment of their own in which to emerge from their cocoons, to hatch, and to occupy the space and make themselves at home. So what's in this bin is the population that was originally launched a year ago, and it was started out as 100 cocoons. I believe multiple worms can emerge from a single cocoon, but today we'll finally get a sense of how many I have now in my population after a full year of first living in smaller containers and eventually working their way into this Vermibag tote. So I've got a new bin set up into which I'm going to relocate the worms. I've decided I'm going to use my sifting mechanism here to clean out the castings because I've never had African nightcrawler castings, and I originally thought about just scooping the material out as is with any sort of residual bedding remaining in it. But I figured, you know what, why don't I take the time to screen it through, and then I'll be able to get a sense of exactly what kind of castings I can expect to get from African nightcrawlers, since it is my first harvest of castings from this type of a worm. So let's get this thing going. I'm going to open up the container here, so I'll relocate the position of the camera to better show what's happening here. It was a week ago that we came in here to do a reset on a horizontal migration feeding zone that's over here. And the idea is to lure all the worms out of what's being treated as the finished castings over here into the feeding zone so they can all be rounded up and relocated into their new home. So now I just want to take this as an opportunity also to fetch these worms, as long as they're all in a single spot, especially these guys on the outer reaches. I don't want them dropping back into the finished castings. I'd like them to stay over in the feeding zone area, along with all the other worms that are going to get captured and relocated today. So I'm just moving them off the plastic all the way to the far end. And I think we've got a few worms to evict from this plastic up here as well. So it's kind of nice to have a pretty good number of these guys collecting here on the surface. I feel just by looking at how many worms we have on the top of this paper, we've already got ourselves, you know, almost a I don't know, not sure how much. I wouldn't say as much as a quarter pound, like a quarter-pound burger patty, but pretty close to that. I'm putting the bag up to the light to see if I can spot any more, but I don't see any more. So hopefully we haven't left anyone behind. Like I said, these little guys are destined to go into the new bin, but I don't want to have them just squirm down into the material here. I'd like to keep them sort of separate already, as long as we've already got them. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take these little guys. I'm going to drop them into this container right here. Alright. The first thing I wanted to do is actually start scooping out what I'm treating as finished compost, run it through the sifter, and anything that's not small enough to pass through the sifter to be collected, I'm just going to treat that as not finished bedding, not finished food scraps, and that'll all remain with the worms. So I'll move that material along with the worms into their new environment. Alright, so I'm just going to start by moving this material right out. Now I suppose if I hit a worm, I'll just extract them from the material and just throw them in over here so they stay with all of their little friends and neighbors. I'm just starting to feel the material to see how likely it is that it's going to pass through the sieve. There are some chunks that are pretty clumpy. When I do break them apart, there's often a little piece of bedding in the middle of it, sort of. So I guess if need be, I'll just kind of rub some of the material that's adhering to the scraps of cardboard and whatnot to help it through the sifter. So let's see how it goes. Let's start moving some of this in. Alrighty. If the stuff breaks apart this easily, though, it's really not that much trouble to sort of help it along a little bit and break it up. But it also seems like I'm going to have a fair amount of material that collects in the sieve and doesn't pass through. So I guess whatever doesn't make its way through the sieve, I'll have to collect that somewhere too. I'll try rotating the screen a little bit. Try not to make a mess either. We got some of this section of the screen that was getting filled in. We're going to have to unload this thing soon, I think. I believe some of this clumpy stuff that just doesn't want to break up and go through the sieve, I bet you if we were to just leave it out for another couple days, uncovered maybe, it would dry up enough so that it would be able to more easily crumble and separate from whatever it is that it's clumping to. So I'm starting to wonder if maybe after I do come up with a pretty good collection of this kind of rough, clumpy stuff that I couldn't sieve through, maybe I'll just end up uncovered, give it a day or two to dry off a bit, and then it will probably go right through the sieve after that. So maybe this stuff will have to still go through a little bit of a drying process after I collect a bunch. But why don't we just take maybe one more handful here, see what we can work through the sieve. And I think it's time to unload this filter so we can have a little bit more room to work as we move on. All right, let's grab this little empty container I've got here. It's what I usually use to clear out my sieve. It's definitely a little bit clumpy. It's adhering to the screen. Oh, look at that. This material is really nice. It's starting to pile up and it's getting in the way. It's kind of cool. I could see right there is a worm cocoon, a fairly dark colored one. Looks like it's going to hatch any minute. I bet you this stuff is full of cocoons. I do have a need in the yard to plant some stuff pretty soon, and that was what I had hoped to use this for. But, hey, I don't know. If I let it sit for another day or two, who knows? I might have fresh worm hatchlings popping out of it. Although, you know, letting that stuff all end up out in the garden is only going to do good for the garden. This is what we're collecting here. Not too much so far, considering we've already emptied out maybe about a third or a quarter of what we intend to move out of here. We'll just press on as is. It shouldn't take too much longer. Oh, there we go. That's the downside to using your hand as a tool. You wear out your protective gear. So I'll be cleaning under my nails today, that's for sure. I don't want to stop and get a new glove. I'll just end up tearing that one too. So I'll just continue to enjoy the protection this glove provides, but But I also know that I'll have a little bit more cleanup to do at the end. And we all know that's no fun, right? Alright. So far, just, for the record, I've not yet encountered one worm. Look at that, we're almost like through the middle here. I'm definitely scooping into the middle at this point, or close to it. I still have yet to see a worm. Might have to unload this filter again soon. Keep going. Try to be careful, not make a huge mess here. And once again, we got pretty nice amount of castings developing in here. I guess this sort of airs it up, so it seems to take up a lot more space this way. Let's see if we can clear off some of this sticky wet stuff, preventing the material from going through. It's just so interesting that we're not encountering any worms yet. Anyway, I know we observed that last time we were in here, and we were checking through the material to see how it's coming along, and I'm pretty sure we saw no worms last time we were poking around here a week ago. I mean, admittedly, this stuff is a little bit clumpy and maybe not friendly from a screening perspective, but as far as dryness is concerned, I would say that it probably is getting to the point where it's maybe a little bit drier than the worms would prefer. Definitely not crumbly and dry, like really loose castings because of the moisture content, but also maybe a little drier than the worms would prefer, especially if there's like a nice moist section that's been fed regularly on the other end. Makes sense for them to go where the party is. And we're definitely at the halfway mark in this bin. I could just lift up the bottom of it at this point. Get all the loose stuff together easily. Still no worms. Kind of surprising. Like I've said in the past, it depends on what you're looking for, really. I mean, this stuff, as far as worm casting are concerned, they're beautiful. The only thing is if you don't like a piece of cardboard in there, a piece of newspaper in there, a little chunk of banana peel, whatever, then okay, maybe you want to sift it through or screen it through. But using it just like this, in my mind, is perfect. It's fine. And guess what? Here we go. We've found our first worm in the castings. A real tiny guy. Little baby worm. Probably no more than a week or two old, considering that size. Just going to put that little guy right over here. Let him squirm down with the rest of his compadres, and wonder how many more we're going to encounter. Then again, you could write that one off as a worm that had just hatched. Just came out of the cocoon and is still just orienting itself to, what's available and what's good, what's bad. So to find a little baby worm like that is certainly not surprising, especially since this material probably is teeming with cocoons. I just wish there was a way to keep this hardware cloth clean. Sometimes I just wonder if it's not passing through because it's got no clear holes to pass through. It's just obstructed. Yeah, pretty obstructed. Not that bad, really. Here again, man, this stuff piles up quickly. It's amazing when you take the stuff that's this compact down here and you fluff it all up, it's really starting to occupy a lot more space in the container than I had expected it to. It's wondering how much further we're going to be able to pick through here. getting really close to the feeding edge here. I know that each time we fed, we always pulled over what was there and put the food on the very far edge. So for us to be finding large chunks of bedding like this already makes complete sense. Most of the feedings would have included a little bit of bedding to go along with the food. They work away the food and the bedding would take much longer. I guess this is probably clear evidence that if we had just done nothing, and we had left this bin go for a long time in the absence of food, the worms would have resorted to eating all of this cardboard bedding material, of which there is a fair amount. So maybe this would have been I don't know, an opportunity to let it just go longer, perhaps starve the bin for a while. Got another worm here, another very small, itsy bitsy worm. Maybe a little bit further along than the one we encountered earlier. But you know, look at how much material we've gone through, and we've looked at it fairly carefully. I've looked at it all the while I was running it across the sifter to see if I spot any worms in the sifter. So far I haven't seen one. Luckily I've been able to capture each of them down here prior to putting them up into the sifter. So I mean, admittedly I'm not perfect. I could have missed one and it might have gone through the sieve. Hopefully I didn't batter it too greatly in the process. But, you know, barring any that I missed, it does seem like I've only seen 3 or 4 so far. And we're really far along. I can't believe how close we are to the feeding edge, and we're still harvesting castings that are free of worms. I'm definitely starting to encounter some larger objects. I see here's one of the corn cobs. This looks like some avocado shell. Now we're starting to run into a few worms here along the perimeter as well. So I'm just going to be careful not to scoop any worms out here when I go to filter through this last little bit. But look at some of these worms, minuscule. I mean, I would have to say that that little guy was just hatched very recently. I just wonder how much more we want to give this treatment to. It doesn't seem like we're going to be able to go much further before we just start hitting a huge wall of worms. Let's see what we can do with what remains in this sieve here. I'm making a big mess every time I turn the sieve like that, but I think that I'm taking some of the encrusted hardware cloth that's full of material in the holes and moving it up so I can better jostle it around and get some material to pass through. Uh-oh, look at this. Got ourselves a couple little worms that stuck to the wall of the container. Oh, hopefully we didn't give them too much of a rub. Don't want to injure any of our little baby worms in here. I promise I'm trying to be careful. Just got so spoiled by not having any worms in the material. At this point it would make sense to slow down if our objective is to not injure any worms in the process. Well, this little guy holding on so strong. Alright, well, you know, pretty big chunks here. No need to force the matter. Let's consider this as where we were headed. This is what we were looking to accomplish today. Let's remove this last little batch of stuff that wouldn't screen. So now, it's not that much. I would say maybe 1.5 gallons. Maybe that is a lot if you think about it. But I bet you if this were to sit for a little while, it'll probably dry off and a whole bunch of castings will probably, you know, result in this, and with the minimal amount of food scraps and bedding left over, I believe. That's just my guess, just from having handled the material. I got a feeling that it's just, you know, slightly damp castings that should crumble apart pretty readily in the next day or two. So I might just leave them in this container, kind of try to spread it out a little bit, increase the surface area across the top, just let it air dry. Maybe even give it a little jostle here and there over the next couple days. Maybe I'll give this stuff another run through the sifter after it's had a chance to dry, and maybe we'll have a few more castings. Now the material in the collection bin here, these finished oops. Sorry, making a mess again as always. So whatever, we threw a little bit of casting material over the side. I think we'll just collect it again and get it back in here. So I was trying to demonstrate how nice and crumbly the material is, and it pretty much just flows, you know, it just pours right out of the container if you tip it over. So I'm trying to be careful not to tip it over because it is pretty full. The container is, I don't know, it's hard to say, you know, if it was resting in there, I would say maybe 2/3 of the way full, pretty much up to here or so. Yeah, at least halfway. So it's a little bit more casting material than I expected to collect on this go around. It's a little bit deceiving. I thought there was not quite as much room in this container, but there is. And you know, like I said earlier, I believe we're also in the process fluffing up the castings, which, you know, aerates them and makes them obviously take up a lot more space that way, all fluffed up. So alright, moment of truth. It's time to get these little guys into their new home. And we've also got these little guys that were hanging out on the paper originally. Remember them? We put them aside. So we got to get all these little guys into their new home. And their new home is, it's actually right over here. It's been sitting here the whole while. I was resting our collection bucket that we were screening into. It was resting in here to give it a little bit more height. A couple bricks to give it some more weight so it wouldn't slide out of our way. So the trick is going to be to get these worms into here without making a huge mess. Maybe scoop it out by hand, one handful at a time, and we'll just get them released into their new space. Before we proceed, let's see if we can get in here a little bit closer to better see what we're working on. Alright, so when I scoop each handful, I'm going to use this as sort of a drop cloth just so I don't end up spilling material all over the place. Hopefully it'll come in larger chunks because it is a little bit damp. Here's our first chunk. We've got some worms in here. There's some banana peels that they're enjoying. There's a corn cob. Okay, here's another handful of material. More of the food that they're enjoying. I guess we'll just start spreading them out a little bit across the surface as we bring them over. Got a fair number of them all over the place. Looks like we got the majority of it in one last handful here. There's another piece of corn. And some worms enjoying a tomato, I guess, maybe? I don't even know what this stuff is. I guess we did bring some castings over, which is fine. Not a big deal. Considering we started with, I don't know, 100 or so cocoons, I don't know how long ago, I would have to guess that we've definitely got more than 100 worms here, since they're all different sizes. There are multiple generations here. Let's see if we've got any more material remaining. No worms in there. No worms in here either. Okay. So, that makes it official. We've got ourselves a brand new home for our African nightcrawlers. I wish I had a better way of estimating how many I've got in here. If there was some way I could just really separate all of the worms from the material, from their food and everything, I wonder how much it would weigh. It's really difficult to tell. Certainly not in the numbers that I'm used to seeing with my red wigglers. My red wigglers, their population just explodes. I guess these guys propagate slightly slower, but either way, what we're left with is, oh, I almost forgot. We still got one last little batch of worms. Remember these guys? They came over with the paper. Oops. Now these guys came together as definitely a little wad. So when I have them like this, you know, without a bunch of other material, then I can almost compare it to, you know, hey, if I had two of these, it would be about a quarter pound, like a quarter pound hamburger. You know, I can equate their weight to, you know, something I'm used to holding in my hand that, you know, has a specific weight to it. So either way, let's give these little guys a little chance to squirm around and get comfortable in their new environment. And in the meantime, I'm just going to start cleaning a few things up around here. Well, I believe that's been enough time to let them get down and get comfortable. So, keeping with tradition, the same way we retired the old bin by removing its label, we christen this new bin as our new African nightcrawler bin, dated today and ready to go. So, I've got a few things to do here. I got to get this thing covered up. I'll find a place for it on the shelf. Got a vermi bag here that's going to need a little bit of cleaning. Not bad though. I'll just take it outside, give it a rinse. So not bad. Pretty good job on the vermi bag. And I got an awesome pile of fresh castings from these African nightcrawlers. They did a really good job. They do really nice, break the material down, creates a nice rich compost. There's not that many of them yet, but this is more than I started with, that's for sure. I started out with just a bunch of cocoons a year ago. And it's kind of cool to see how they've, you know, increased in size and increased in their population. And now they're becoming a capable little bunch. So I'm going to be looking forward to getting these guys into a larger, more spacious abode pretty soon. This is just a starter little environment for me to get them going in. I'll move them into a larger container soon. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. I'm pretty much done here other than some cleaning up, but I won't keep you around for that since that's boring. I'll just take this as a chance to say thanks for watching. I appreciate your company. And if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comments below then. And as long as you're clicking on the screen, be sure to give it a like as well. If you give it a like, I really appreciate that. And consider subscribing to the channel too. That's always really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.